Мешканці, працівники та дирекція Українського дому для сеньорів імені святих Петра і Павла щиросердечно вітає друзів, рідних та усю українську громаду зі світлим та радісним праздником Христового Воскресіння. Та бажаємо всім щастя, радості та смачної Пасхи.
Христос Воскрес! Воістину Воскрес!
В січні в Українському домі на Кристі відбулася презентація монументального фільму «The Soviet Story». Сьогодні маємо для вас інтерв'ю з режисером цього надзвичайного фільму.
The Soviet Story is an eye-opening, horrific documentary about crimes committed by the Soviet regime in early and mid-20th century. Talks about mass killings of Soviet citizens, including Holodomor and Gulag concentration camps, as well as the collaboration between Nazis and Soviets during World War II.
Hands tied behind the back, an expertly aimed shot in the neck, and the fall into a huge mass grave. These people were not killed by the Nazis. They were killed by one of the Allies, the Soviet Union.
I got a chance today to speak with the film's writer and director, Edvins Snore. Here's what he had to say. So what made you decide to make this film?
Well, I'm coming from a country which has been occupied by the Soviet Union, and I wanted to show the history of those nations who were occupied to the Western public.
So you grew up in Soviet Latvia. What was that sort of like? Did you hear stories from family members, from your grandparents, from your parents?
Yes, my grandmother told me many stories about the war, about the Soviet occupation, and that was very different from I was told at school. And then I had this dilemma whom to believe, whether my grandmother or the school. Well, I believe my grandmother.
I'm curious to know, how has the sort of general view of the Soviet regime and Stalin changed today from what it was back when you were growing up in Soviet Latvia?
Well, at that time, during the Soviet times, during the Soviet occupation, it was not allowed to talk about these things, about the deportations, about the Gulag, about the Ukrainian famine. It was not allowed to talk about it. So right now it is allowed, and we are informing people about it, because many people, not only in Latvia, did not know it, but also in the West. So we are informing people about these things which are very little known about.
Right, in the documentary you talk about how the crimes committed by Nazis are so well known, they're condemned, but the ones committed by the Soviets aren't. People don't know it. People out in the West don't know about it. Why is that? And do you see that changing?
Well, I do see that changing, at least in Europe, because Europe now has, is united, and there are new European countries like Poland, like the Baltic states, join the European Union, and in order to form a united identity of Europeans, we must talk about these things, because if we just talk about what Western Europe came through, then it is not fair, to the other half of Europeans. So what I see now, that it is changing in Europe.
What's the most unexpected discovery you made when researching this film?
The most unexpected? Well, I was amazed and surprised to find this great similarity between the Nazi and Soviet posters. They were very similar. And I was also surprised to find this footage of Bernard Shaw speaking about people who must be eliminated because they do not, cannot sustain themselves and so on.
You must all know half a dozen people at least who are no use in this world, who are more trouble than they are worth. Just put him there and say, sir or madam, now will you be kind enough to justify your existence?
There's been some strong criticism surrounding the film in Russia. As you've mentioned, they've burned your effigy on the streets of Moscow. What do you think about that kind of extreme reaction out there?
Well, I think that that shows that their academic arguments against the film are probably very limited. Their arsenal of arguments. If they have to resort to that kind of reactions, physical threats and things like that, that means that they cannot argue and use academic arguments against it.
And you talk about in the film, how the West hasn't condemned Soviet crimes because of the dependence on Russian oil and gas and all that. What do you think is the outlook for that? Do you see that changing? What can be done to change that?
Well, that is the real politics. It is like that things, economy is influencing these things, and we know that Germany and France and other Western European countries they depend very much on the Russian resources, and that is why they are not willing sometimes to discuss these Soviet atrocities. But I think it is wrong path, because if we are ignoring these crimes, then we are building our collaboration with Russia and with partners in general on lies. Then we just lie about what happened, and I think that if you build something on lies, then nothing good can come out of it. So I think that relations between nations should be built on truth, and this is what we are doing with this film. I would like people to understand that the Soviet regime was a criminal regime, that it was not only the Nazi Germany which left many millions of people dead, but that it was also the Soviet Union, and we have to condemn these crimes of the Soviet Union, crimes against humanity, so that they are not repeated in future. That is the main message of the film. So we have to first of all know about these things. We have to remember them, like Ukrainian famine, like Katyn massacre, and other Soviet crimes, and educate young people about it, so that it is not repeated in future.
If you missed the screening, you can still watch The Soviet Story. It can be purchased online at sovietstory.com or at select stores. For Kontakt, I'm Justine Lewkowicz.